Hi, Susie Homesteader of the Rockies, and welcome to the Susie Homesteader channel. And hopefully you saw a couple of my other videos we're doing on our wood stove series. And some of those are going to include how to find your wood, what types of wood to use, how to store and stack wood. And then another video we're doing is what kind of stoves to buy and look into and ways to install them. And then this one today is going to be about how to start a fire in a wood stove. Now, I know you're thinking that sounds ridiculous. If you're a human, you would instinctively know how to start a fire. But that's actually not true, and I can tell you a couple good stories about some people that live in, we'll just say, some southern states that couldn't start a fire or keep a fire going if their life depended on it. So up here in the Rockies, knowing how to start your fire as efficiently as possible gets pretty important when it gets super cold outside and you're possibly relying on just your wood stove for heat. Now there's a couple little tricks to getting these fires started, but most of that has to do with timing. So timing is everything on a wood stove fire. It's not like starting a fire outside where you have lots of oxygen to help fuel your fires. You're essentially starting a fire in a metal box with very little oxygen and very little air to create your draw. So what I'm going to show you, besides some of the tools that you're going to need to start your fire, is just the basics, and we'll talk about some safety concerns as well. So obviously the first thing you're going to start with after your wood stove is properly installed and safely installed is to make sure that your chimney is cleaned before you start. And obviously the best times to clean your chimney is going to be in the spring and the fall. So right after you've gotten done burning all your fires for the winter, and then right before you're getting ready to start burning your fires again. 25,000 chimney fires a year from people having too much creosote built up in their chimney pipes. So that's a real statistic. Out here in this part of the Rockies, I hear about somebody's house burning down every winter because of a chimney fire, or because they left a bucket of ashes in their house or in a very unsafe place outside their house. So two ways to start some fires, and two very serious safety concerns that we'll talk about later. But assuming you have your stove installed properly and your chimney is cleaned, which I'll have another video on how to clean your chimney closer to the spring, since we've got about 2 feet of snow up on the roof. So I'm going to wait on that video, but I'll have that one for you as well, if you're not going to hire somebody to do it and you're planning on doing it yourself. So assuming that's all done, there's a couple things you're going to absolutely have to start your fire. And the first one, of course, is going to be some newspaper. So because my fire is already started, I'm not going to actually build this fire up to show you how to start it, but you know, it's really just all common sense. So assuming you have just some nice newspaper that has as little ink as possible on it. You know, you don't want those waxy, really inky advertisements they put inside the newspapers. If you don't have access to newspaper, you can also buy those big rolls of just paper that you can get through your local newspaper printers when they have extra rolls that they haven't used. And they'll sell you those sometimes by the weight and by the pound. So if you, again, you don't have a subscription to a newspaper or you don't have any place to pick it up, you can buy those big rolls from your local newspaper printer. And there's no ink on them, so those are nice to have too as backup. So assuming your newspaper's ready, all you're going to do obviously is just take that paper, crumple it up. Do not put it in there in pieces like this, because what the main thing you're trying to create when you're building your fire is little air pockets and oxygen in between all your materials. So starting a fire can sometimes be a little trickier than you think. So get your newspaper and crumple it up, not too tight, not too loose. Make nice big crumply pieces of paper, stick it in the base of your stove here. It's sometimes better to have like 1 inch to 2 inches of charcoal or ash in the bottom. So if you've just cleaned your stove and you completely sucked out all the ashes and charcoal, it's a little bit harder to start. I will say if you have a little bit left in the bottom, it's much easier to get going. But I've done it with my stove perfectly clean and completely vacuumed out. So you can still do it even if it's perfect or brand new and you've never started a fire in it before. Just takes probably a little bit more newspaper. So just kind of line your bottom of your stove with your newspaper. And then the second most important ingredient you're going to need is your kindling. And you know, there's lots of different names for this. Some people call them chips, you name it. People call it all kinds of stuff, but all you care about is that you have a bunch of different sizes. So like a piece like that, for example, is probably too small. And then pieces like this are getting too big. So what we want to do is start having a couple different sizes and weights. And this is kind of more of an ideal size. And really, the thinner the better. There's two kinds of wood, which we'll talk about in another video. But the softwoods and the hardwoods are really what we're talking about. And the softer woods, which basically means it's less dense, and it's drier, and it's lighter, are the pieces that you want to use for your kindling. So you're kind of working your way up from the lightest materials and then eventually to the heaviest materials that you can put into your wood stove. So the best kind of kindling is the lightweight, softer woods, different sizes, and then of course the lengths that your stove is going to hold. So for example, most stoves will take pieces on an average of 14 to 16 inches in length. So obviously you want your kindling to be close to that same length, because your kindling you're just splitting from your bigger pieces of wood, which are going to be about that same length as well. And then, as I said, we'll talk more about firewood on another video. But this is an example of like a ponderosa pine that in this part of the Rockies is primarily what we burn. It's seasoned, meaning that it's been dried out for 1 or 2 years. Some of this wood is so dry and so old because it's from an old growth forest. It actually still even has some moss growing on it. So the older, the drier, the better. And this is considered a softwood as well, just you know, for a quickie on the wood types. But it is also nice to have some hardwoods or some heavier, denser pieces, maybe just some bigger pieces in your pile when you're starting your fire, because those are the ones you're going to want to use at night because they'll burn longer. So there's a lot to talk about on wood, but in general, it just means the softer and the lighter, the hotter it will burn, but the shorter time you will have for it to burn, and the heavier and the denser and the more of a hardwood style is going to burn longer but not as hot. Make sure that your damper or your flue rod or whatever your term for this damper is all the way open before you start your fire, because you need lots of oxygen. And another thing you might have to do is actually leave your door crack to hair, which every stove is so very different. So, you know, for example, on my stove, after I've got my paper in and after I've got my kindling stacked in there, I have to leave this open, I mean, just an exact amount. So I have just the right amount of air getting in there to keep that fire going. So it'll be different for every stove, and you'll probably need over a week or 2 or 3 fires before you really get to know how your stove works. So that just kind of comes as time goes. You will not be stacking your kindling in there like a teepee, like you would stack logs outdoors, because you're not going to have the space for that in this square box. So everybody has some little different version of how they put their kindling in there. Some people use tons of kindling because it kind of depends on the type of kindling you're using. And I can use just maybe one little stack of this newspaper to line the bottom, and I can start a fire with maybe just 4 or 5 pieces of kindling. But again, timing is super important on that. So I try not to use up all my kindling, you know, because somebody has to split this. But you'll see everybody has their kind of own little way of starting fires. Some people like to put like one big log in the back, because most of that heat and draw is going to start towards the back of your stove, closer to the opening to your pipe. So, you know, all I do is just make sure that it's just kind of crisscrossed a little bit somehow. You know, some people have perfect little patterns that they do, you know, when they're stacking their kindling in there. But honestly, I just throw a couple pieces in there, different directions, so that I still have plenty of a little bit of airflow underneath that kindling. So again, crumpled paper, kind of crisscross your kindling around. Use as many pieces as you need to try and get that started. You can use stick matches, which I actually like better than just like the click lighters, you know, the long lighters. I don't really like those because they don't always start. Anyway, good old-fashioned wood matches work the best. That way you can even kind of throw them towards the back of the fire, the kindling, if you want to do that too. So a couple different things you can use to light it with. And then, like I said, I leave mine cracked a hair. And then, you know, within minutes is kind of the time frame that you're looking for as to when you know to either shut the door completely so that fire takes off a little better, or you're going to open it and start putting your wood in. So again, we're building it up slowly and by density. So try and pick maybe some of your lighter pieces, smaller pieces of wood to start building your fire. And again, try and put that in different directions on top of that kindling also, so that you still have lots of air underneath everything. And just try not to get everything to collapse straight to the bottom and on top of the ashes, because somehow you just have to have some space between everything. So that's kind of really the trick to all of it. And then as your fire builds up, you can start adding more pieces, and you can start adding heavier pieces. So again, at night we talked about using the bigger, heavier, denser pieces, because it'll burn longer at night and you don't have to get up all night long, hopefully. And then as your fire builds and you think it's at, you know, a good rate where it's not going to go out, then like in my case with this stove, you're just going to start pushing that or closing that vent. And that's closing the oxygen, so that fire will not burn as fast. It will burn slower because it has less oxygen. So you may have to adjust this off and on over the day or the night, depending on how your wood is burning. If your wood's not burning very well, you better open it up and give it some more oxygen. If it's burning too hot, you're going to start shutting that down a little bit, or what we call stoking the fire. So different terms for every place you live. But it's not rocket science, but it's also sometimes not some innate instinct that you're born with. So a lot of it just has to do with your stove and get to know your stove. Again, having that chimney clean is super important. You'll know if your chimney is getting clogged because your fires just aren't going to take off, and they're just going to get harder and harder to start if it doesn't have that draw. So, and there are people, which I talked about a little bit in my other video on how to install a stove, wood stove, that have to do other versions of a backdraft, where they have to put in maybe some duct underneath their stove or some other place where they can draw air in from the outside to get those fires going. So, and a lot of it again will have to do with how straight your pipe is. You know, if you have no elbows and no angles, that helps a lot. So the fewer of those, the better. And the straighter the pipe and the more direct airflow you have, the better your fire is going to go. So lots of things to think about on starting a fire. But, you know, it's not something you're going to know how to do right off the bat. And it all has to do with the kind of stove you have. So some of the newer stoves have a lot more adjustments. Some of them have knobs on the front. Some of them have these rods on the side. So it will all kind of depend on what your stove is constructed of. And then some of them will have a blower up on the top built in, which I do not have. That also helps with the draw too of air. I don't seem to need one on mine because I have a ceiling fan installed in my ceiling close by. So that of course helps with circulating the heat, which I talked about a lot in my other video about installing your wood stove. So there's lots of other ways, again, to draw oxygen into your house and into your wood stove as well, because that's really your biggest challenge. And then hopefully if you're successful enough with having your fires started and keeping them going. And then of course the real ticket is having them go as long as possible at night, especially if it's your only source of heat, is really where it starts to get important. So there's a couple tricks for you on starting your wood stove and starting a fire in your wood stove. And then we're also going to talk about cleaning your stove. I told you I'll have a video for you on cleaning your chimney, which will be completely separate from cleaning your wood stove. But again, the most important aspect of cleaning your stove is going to be your ash bucket. This is one style, but the style I would recommend that you buy is the kind that has a lid. And I'll tell you why, because if you have your ceiling fan going or any other kind of flow of air in the house while you're cleaning out your ashes, the minute you dump those ashes into your bucket, they do fly all over the place. So what I do is I just take my newspaper while I'm doing this, and then when I'm shoveling out my ashes, I stick it in there and I cover it for just a second to get those ashes to kind of settle. It is kind of nice, again, like I said, to have a bucket with a lid if you do have problems with these ashes flying out when you're taking it out of the stove. So you're going to need the ash bucket, lots of different types of that. You're going to need some kind of tool for scooping it out. There's this kind, and then there's a wider kind that kind of looks just like a dustpan, but of course they all have to be metal. And then I don't want to talk about how many fires there are every year from these ash buckets. It's amazing to me that people can be that stupid, but it does happen. You know, the bottom of these buckets gets super hot. So I don't care if you have a lid on here or your fire is completely, you think your fire ashes or charcoal are completely cold. If you have something like this sitting on a laminate floor or a carpet or a front porch that's constructed out of wood, there's a good chance that it's going to burn whatever it's sitting on. And not only that, if you have it next to some curtains or fabric or drapery or anything in your house that a hot coal could light up, you can kiss your house goodbye. So I don't know what the statistics are on fires for people putting their ash buckets in the wrong places, but my suggestion is get your ashes in the bucket, take it outside, sit it in the snow, get it on the rocks, get it away from outbuildings. That's another story. People set their or dump their ashes next to an outbuilding, and the outbuilding catches on fire. So you just can't believe, you know, that people can get this far and then still have their house burned down. But it does happen as much as those chimney fires. So I just cannot stress enough how careful you have to be with these buckets. And then, you know, when you're cleaning out your stove, of course, make sure all your vents are open too, so some of that ash dust can go up instead of out. So, and if you can leave like an inch or two of that still on the bottom, it's a better way to restart your fires. So get those ashes in there, get them out. If your fire is burning too hot, you're gonna know, because for one thing, you may get the chimney fire and you'll actually see flames coming out the top of your roof or your cap on the outside of your roof, and or the bricks on the inside of your stove may crack as well. So you just do not want your fire too hot, and if you don't run your fires hot enough where you're constantly stoking down your vent and you know, any dampers that you might have. Some of them have dampers in the pipe as opposed to the stove itself. Some of them have both. But if you keep those dampers shut too often, you'll also know that your fires are either being run too hot or too cold, because you're going to get a whole bunch of creosote built up in those pipes because the fire is not hot enough to burn out some of that creosote. They do make a thermometer, a magnetic thermometer that you can place on top of your stove or on the pipe, which I actually don't have because I try and just use common sense. But if you're not sure if your fire is too hot or running too cold, you might want to invest in one of those thermometers, and it will tell you the actual temperature of your stove while it's burning. So again, you don't want your fires running too cold, you don't want them running too hot. So there is kind of a nice little middle zone on running those fires. Over the years, I think we kind of just judge it, you know, based on the amount of heat that it's radiating. But there is a thermometer for that if you're really kind of questioning that in the beginning. So another thing I like to have for cleaning is a soft brush. as opposed to kind of like the broom style, you know, bristles that they give you with the tool kits. Mostly just because you need a fine bristle to actually brush these ashes. You know, a coarse bristle is not going to actually get rid of your ashes that spill or get stuck on these lips. So there's another thing you can buy at a hardware store or something, but it's a soft brush as opposed to some bristle brush, hard bristle. So there's a couple other tools you're going to need for cleaning. I will have a complete supply list for you on tools and everything from A to Z that you'll need for your wood stove, including some of the actual pieces for installing them. But there's a couple things I don't have that you might want to invest in, and one of those is like some thermal fire retardant gloves. So if you do ever have an issue where you open this up and you have a piece fall on the ground and you don't have the other kind of tools, you know, just the long metal tools or the grippers to pick that up, you might want to get those gloves. Plus, you can also actually put your hand in the stove with those gloves and move pieces around if you want to. But I've never done that, and I don't know if I ever will. A couple other things that I highly recommend having just for safety is going to be a fire extinguisher nearby, just in case, you just never know. A carbon monoxide detector, because that is one of the toxic gases that can come out of your stove anywhere. And especially if you think you're going to burn anything that might have paint or stain or treated materials or anything toxic, which should never, 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 never go in your wood stove anyway. They even shouldn't even be burned outside. But if you think there's something in your stove that might be slightly toxic, carbon monoxide detector you should have close by. And then, of course, a smoke alarm, just in case at night something happens that you don't know about, or even during the day. So 3 more things: fire extinguisher, carbon monoxide detector, and a smoke alarm. And so you may also want to invest in a screen, an actual cover screen if you have little kids that just plain old don't listen to you. Every one of my children was told not to touch the wood stove. I probably told them that 10 or 12 times, and every single one of them at some point or another touched the wood stove. But I will tell you, they never did it again. So I never did invest in a screen, but if you have really little kids or pets that, you know, well, this is a pet that likes the heat, but you may want to also invest in one of those safety screens, just, you know, for stoves or fireplaces. So lots of things that you can purchase. You know, I honestly probably only purchased half of those because most of what we do has to do with just being careful. So, and, you know, paying attention and watching what's going on with your wood stove. So, and then of course, just try not to burn waxy, sappy wood, anything sticky. You know, I know a lot of people try and burn their trash in wood stoves, which is also not another good idea, not just because of air pollution, but because that will clog up your stove faster. So, you know, once in a while we throw some plastic or some paper plates in there, but even those have wax on them. Cardboard really flies out the top very easily. So you just still do not really want to burn anything but wood in your wood stove. And just for the record, we go through maybe 5 to 6 cords per winter, but this is my only source of heat on the top floor of a 2-story house. And we'll talk about a lot more of that when we do our video on types of wood and how much wood you need per winter. So I save, you know, close to $200 a month on my electric bill because I have this wood stove and because we do run it sometimes almost 6 months out of the year if we have a really long winter. So besides the hard, cold part of the year that we'll be running this, there are times in the spring and the fall where it's just kind of nice to have some wood heat. And there is nothing nicer than wood heat. There's a couple good ideas for you on starting your wood fires in a wood stove, and I'll also have some other videos for you on how to cook on a wood stove, and just some other fun subjects. We might even do a couple interviews with some loggers who know absolutely everything about wood. So if you have any questions, come and see me on my website, Susie Homesteader of the Rockies, and we will see you there. Bye-bye. So let's get started. Subscribe to the Susie Homesteader channel, and we'll see you there. Bye-bye.